Hey, hello everyone. Welcome to another episode. Okay, today I had the inspiration to wonder about what is moving the human experience. And if there is a chance that we are not just objects and we're living as if we are, how would the future come to this realization? How would we see 8 billion human beings behaving when there is a multidimensional context to their being? So this episode is titled When You Realize You're Not Just an Object. Subtitle: excuse me. In the subtitle, two other sentences emerged, I guess, in the space of my mind. One was contentment with the transcendent. And the other, could the mind be a higher dimensional access point? Now, there's 8 billion human beings. It's fair to say there can be 8 billion angles towards approaching this view of life, like you're just more than an object. And to be honest, this is a title where I have spoken a lot about, and I'm wondering how else can I approach it in this episode. So I guess if I was to turn these all into questions, the last one is a question, but it would be as if, how can we, or do we, know we are more than an object? How can a multidimensional being, this is the idea of transcendental, how can a multidimensional being be content with all its dimensions? When I say could the mind be a higher dimensional access point, that's another way of saying what kind of portal is the mind. In my previous talks, I had come to the conclusion that the body is here for a visible life. The mind is here to acknowledge the invisible. And poetically, the soul, for those who consider a sort of 100% unknown presence in the moment. I would say it's an inconceivable life. This is another way of saying physicality. We are physical, so we notice the visible. We are a mind to notice our non-physicality. Is to notice the invisible. And poetically, the soul beyond phenomena is to notice the inconceivable. So if the traditional spiritual person, let's say, wanted to, liberate their soul, or they wanted the idea of how what is primarily moving them to go to a paradise and all that. For me, I'm like this human being saying that there's these three dimensions to life, and the human life is mainly focused on how we can experience being a mind before a body, right? That means it's like a person may wonder, especially somebody who's conscious of, like, let's say, the writings of, Vedanta and the ancient books, Puranas, Upanishads, there's this view that a person, for example, can commit such a grave sin that in, like, their next lifetime they can become like a dog, okay? Or in their next lifetime they become a species that didn't appreciate the value of its consciousness, for example. The idea is simply that nature has been moving us, and the moment we could separate ourselves from nature, a sort of movement began where the self began moving nature, right? So when we talk about, for example, understanding is limited to the human experience, and the human experience is where the idea of self emerges, So if we were to look at the sentence, let's say the question, what is the meaning of life? I am saying the life This is world moving self, and the meaning is self-moving world. So it's another way of saying that human beings have an experience with their consciousness being unconsciously moved, and then their consciousness moving in the unconscious. These are important dimensions to consider because they're very universal. You know, you can have the most powerful, let's say, smartest, able in all physical dimensions kind of, person. And at the end of their day, like it's like even Superman, didn't know what was going to happen tomorrow. Batman didn't know, his face he was going to punch like the next night, So the idea is that regardless of how much, let's say, egotistical claim, or how much the ego claims reality and in some sense believes that true confidence means to in some sense, how would I say it, know what's the moment. Pretty much, all human beings have a relationship with how their consciousness is creating knowledge. And how their knowledge is in the presence of that. It's like unconscious, it's like technically this unconsciously conscious and consciously unconscious. The human game of life, I found it's like it's between these dimensions. There is a known causal here, cause, effect, and what are the options, pretty much, as long as we consider a cause and effect reality. We have pretty much, let's say, known, starting in a known causal position, and let's say the effect of it is known. This would technically be a universe. Here, this is what I would say is world conscious of itself. Or here, before I write that, let me finish this. So in the causal position we have known, in the effect we have known, in the causal position we have known, in the effect we have unknown. Then we have something that's causally unknown, and then its effect, let's say, is known. And then we have something that's causally unknown, and then its effect is unknown. I would say before we had consciousness of any sort, this is the world we were in. We were in a world that was causally unknown and its effect was unknown. That means there was something happening, but there was no identification through memory to be like, oh yeah, it's happening to me. The idea of ourself is an invention. It's an evolutionary step. People don't realize it, right? It's like the child is not born. Excuse me. The child is not born with a database of knowledge in its brain. A complex, sophisticated, symbolic classification of how real events have an abstract internal existence. So to me, it makes sense that I look at this creature and I'm like, it didn't always know it was a creature, right? So that was in some sense how the cause was unknown, the effect was unknown. Now, the cause, we reached a point where the cause was unknown, and suddenly the effect became known. What that means is we don't know how the human being got here, but we know that the human being noticed they got here. Right? That means it's like technically modern society is like we don't know how it began, but we know what's here. Right? We know the effect so far. This is why novelty is incredible, because novelty is another way of saying we're at the edge of the effect of reality. Then something very unique happened, and we became known. That means consciousness emerged. And when consciousness emerged, the effect became unknown. That means right now, let's say a human being wondering what's going to happen after death, right? They're saying, I know what's happening now, and then I want to see, I don't know what will happen, right? It's as if we keep the present in the known, we keep the future in the unknown, right? So technically what this means, this is what I think they don't teach in schools, is that they don't teach the subjective evolution. There was a subjective evolution. There was a moment in history where a name could be a person. Isn't that incredible? A phenomenological event which has no correlation to anything because it's just something just directly happening. We found an indirect way of pinpointing it. Right? For me, it's as if like the mysteries of human life, they start off with how we're keeping ourselves causally known. Right? Like, for example, ethnocentrism is another way of saying how the causal position is being known, the effect is unknown. It's another way of saying, are we giving a definition to the causal position of reality? If everything, when I say cause and effect, guys, just take this in that it's like the world, all particles in space, or everything in existence, right? It is like a domino. What that means, it's like when the first one's pushed, everything's being pushed. It's like technically we can create a hilarious, interpreting cause and effect as a sort of domino metaphor. It would be as if like the Big Bang is another way of saying like push the first domino. And the incredible thing is, because we're considering the human archetype didn't exist until we got here, on some level, to personify the past, it could be a present intervention, right? You see, what I'm trying to say is that the world was moving us, but when we began moving ourselves in the world, we had to forget that the world was moving us. And that forgetfulness allowed the initial separation of consciousness to begin. So for me, it's as if let's say, in ancient mythology, you hear like, the human being was considered to be a child of Mother Earth and Father Sky. That means since ancient times, they were aware how, in some sense, the mind was like space and the body is matter. And technically, we can't know we are a body unless there's that conscious space. That means consciousness is required to access existence before the consciousness of that existence becomes an experience. So when I say you're not just an object, it's like the question goes to this point where we're like, okay, we want to solve this mystery of the human life and where it's happening, what is even happening, how can we even perceive that something's happening, right? It's like when the questions are great, all insincerity and dishonesty and inefficiency go away. I am telling you, people think honor is how like the context is victorious. You could say in some sense, if the species right now had an honor to build an advanced civilization, and just to fathom how advanced human beings will be in the future, It's like all the inefficiency, all the games we're playing with the past stop the moment the future enters the room. You know? That means it's like saying it's like which has more value, an ancient revelation or a modern revelation. You know? For me, I on some deep down, I feel like religious, let's say monotheistic revelation. When people consider from different religious faiths that the revelation is the absolute, right? It's as if it's like this very unique moment in history where the past and the way it's accepting itself filters every future event. You know? I'm telling you, the mystery of evolution remains in the mind of human beings. I think till the end of time, we're gonna be like, what's going on? But we'll just have a bigger feel of the picture. Sorry guys, this was on mute and I was saying what I felt was suppressing and stuff. Anytime it's like if I say there is no intermission and it's mute more than like a minute, it would be good for the viewers to let me know. But pretty much at the point that it was muted, I was talking about a work of science fiction that I enjoyed. where I was suggesting that, philosophers are tasked with, let's say futures philosophers are tasked with wondering about, the evolution of the nature of man's mind. Are we going to go into a future where the past is the far filtering it? Are we going to use the information of the past to build the future, or are we going to allow, the future to happen in ways that we don't know yet? They say knowledge is power, but what knowledge is the expansion of awareness. And everybody has an original awareness. Eyes open. Pretty much your eyes open, consciousness is present as a world. We become conscious of the content of this world. Excuse me. I'm just trying to say, our eyes open. We notice a physical body inside a physical world. We notice the simultaneity of body projecting mind and mind. We project the body as free will. The mind appears as the space where our body is in. The content we find in this space, we draw lines to the central idea of ourself. Now, a person says, how do I know I'm a visible body? The answer comes, okay, I know I'm being a visible body because I am simultaneously being an invisible mind. Now the question comes, how do I know I'm an invisible mind? And we think just its contrast with the body is enough, but that's not the case. It's like how you will know that you're an invisible mind, or it's another way of saying how is a mind knowing it's a body is actually prior to its own definition of a mind. How many people have written books on the mind, but it's like, what if it's like what is experiencing the mind is actually an unknown witness? Right? This is one of the most fascinating conclusions of cases about a human being. I've reached in this lifetime, where it was all the ideology that was kept through knowledge being based on memory in the past. It's as if when a person doesn't do anything, or there's no effort for an object to move, or there's no effort for a subject to move, or even if it's moving, it can also be effortless. But the idea is that what is looking through our eyes is unknown. And because we're intelligent, we say it's unknown intelligence. And because we're in a cosmos, the intelligence appears in the cosmos, we say it's an unknown cosmic intelligence. A simpler word would be divinity. So it's as if we are an invisible force moving a visible shape But the invisible force, because it is moving the visible shape, cannot be a visible force. So technically, it's like, what does an invisible being, or what would be the enlightenment of an invisible being, not a visible being? Right, because there's the embodiment. Like if a group of really spiritual people were talking, they might say, like, a question that may arise would be like, okay, who would you be if there was no body? If there was literally no physical existence, we were sight in the world, right? It would be like an opportunity for just space to be anything in its space. I have this view that deep down, we are actually being sectors of space. That means what is looking through our eyes, we dress it up in the human archetype, but it's not just human. We are not just human beings. We are being human consciously, but in our unconscious, the potential of being surpasses the limits of the idea of the human being. So it's another way of saying the future generations need to really find a strategy, which I'm hopefully, I could assist, but the future generations need to find a strategy to allow dehumanized states of mind to be capable of either returning or accessing a humanized state of mind. For me, I feel like it's as if like the known is let's say back in the day, a warrior had a sword and a shield, right? To me, I feel like the sword and the shield is in some sense what consciousness has access to. Imagine back in the day there was a warrior, and the warrior, like, let's say there was a general, and this person was being rude to a general, and a warrior beside that general suddenly, it was about to take out his sword, and then, the general says, like, what's the term? Unsheath? Let me check this. It's like sheathe your swords. So imagine this general, somebody's being rude to this general, and then the commanding officer is about to take out his sword, and the general looks at his commanding officer and says, "Sheathe your sword," right? But we don't hear people saying, "Sheathe your world." That means imagine the person raising his sword was like it's equivalent to the mind projecting the world. Do you know? And so it's as if like mysticism, like all the ancient yogis, they were like, sheathe the world, or it's another way of saying sheathe your mind. That means there's an effort due to the attachment of what has to happen, and then there's an effort, there's like an effortless viewer for viewing space prior to the effort comes. That means it's like when I'm giving these talks, I'm not just aware of how my body's being here, but when it comes to my inner realms, I'm aware of how much of my own effort leads to the movement of my inner realms when I speak. But speaking is also a unique situation, because when a person speaks out loud, their ears are also rehearing their own thoughts, right? So that's another way where it's like, layers are added to perception. But it also has to do with the speed of your mind, and I'll say this, anybody who trusts their world, the speed of their inner realms will be very fast. But somebody who distrusts their world, your inner realms slow down, and if you distrust yourself, your imagination is going to just be like sleeping. It's pretty much like a person being like, okay, me being a human being is like some effort of energy. If I was to wonder about where is the effort of my own humanity arising from, it's like the origin of that is actually prior to the human idea. I don't know how to say it. It's like the world is being the self, and we forgot this when the self began considering it became the world. Consciousness is how a self is being the world. Unconscious is how the world is being the self, pretty much. And I feel that like the resolution of this in the future. Pretty much right now, where like these objects or it's like, right, it's like, let's say first there was an unknown world, and then an unknown self arose, a biological evolutionary body that wasn't conscious of itself, and then from the unconscious world there came the unconscious self. Now the unconscious self is turning into a conscious self, right? And the only thing left is for the conscious self to realize it is consciously being the world that is being the self. And that is the end. I shouldn't say end, but that's the graduation beyond the human archetype. I shouldn't say beyond the human archetype, but beyond the karma of this plane. That means this world is strangely a teacher. And I find that what the world is trying to teach the unknown eyes of consciousness is simply that once a being can be content with both sides of the coin, they are released beyond the need of an infinite chaos and order loop. So it's as if this realm is designed so that we can witness chaos and order simultaneously. Therefore, prior to defining to one side of the coin, we are the whole coin. You know, or better, those who have true insight, they begin to realize that their eyes were never here. Like they're real, like it's poetic. It's like a remote control car, and the person who's controlling the remote control car is not in the car, right? And it's this other way of saying, like, we're like this remote control entity, and we're like, okay, where are we being remotely controlled from? And we're realizing it's an inconceivable dimension if our realizations reach the point of the invisible nature of the mind. And I can't tell you how many different yogis have given the same advice for enlightenment, which is pretty much sit still and silent and actually imagine there was a meditation that said do nothing. That means you're trying to see in your most effortlessness what sort of experience does the presents itself, you know. And it's such an instantaneous simplicity that when a person wonders how they are being, what their karma is, which is based on the doership of the psyche, it's like you suddenly realize everything a person has been doing has simultaneously been being. And if there is a true relationship of awareness with awareness equating being, then it's as if like it's pretty much like for the body, the self like dies and goes to the void, let's say, poetically, and for the mind, the self dies and becomes the eternal. It's like a temporary knower is eternally, or an eternally unknown intelligence is temporarily knowing its intelligence through the framework of, let's say, this room of manifestation. It could be that our world is just one room of a house, you know, and there's so many different rooms to this universal sector that we haven't tapped into. There could be imagined parallel dimensions where the other planets are populated by other species, you know. I think I'm going to go into a quote tunnel and end this off. I'm sure the 0 viewers won't mind. When you realize you're not just an object, it means an invisible access point has been reached. That means there's a checkpoint. You've noticed that you can move this body and the mover's force is subjectively invisible. I mean, I shouldn't say invisible, intangible, so I could say. That means we can see our thoughts, but we cannot touch them. That's how our mind is behaving like a portal. The mind is the bridge or the portal between the inner realms and outer realms. Why are our eyes here at all? Why have 8 billion creatures that harbor inner universes unique perceptions in accordance to their DNA and ethnocentrism? The question, I think, will come down to how can we find another technology to comprehend the human experience of existence that's beyond a copy-paste approach. And so far, I would say, in accordance to mystical insight, I would say pretty much when you can accept where you are, you can see beyond it. So the depth of our truth is limited to what we can accept. If a person can't accept an unknown future, they have, in some sense, it's like the knowledge of the past has shackled them. Honestly, I've reached a point in my life, guys, where I've been like, okay, there's a visible existence. It's like, that's cool. There's an invisible movement of mind, an invisible experience of the visible existence. That's cool. It's like, okay, been there, done that. Now I am left into wondering what else can happen. A visible perception, like an invisible perception. That means it's like, okay, first you think the world is invisible, the self is visible, then you think the self is visible, the world is invisible, then they can both be invisible or they can both be visible. And you reach a point where you're like beyond the geometrical expressionism of this cause and effect modality of our perception. What can happen? And it's as if when you realize there's infinite geometry, it's another way of saying knowledge has no ending, and it's like a charades, right? It's as if like in an infinite world, its meaning could be, it's like if the world, if we say what is the world, and it's like the world equals world W plus infinity, the world plus infinity. It would be as if the truth of the world would also be plus infinity. And it would be as if if you were using the scientific method, you'd come to the challenge of how can we index the whole cosmic reality to become certain of our approaches to it. It's another way of saying the world is too big to be put into any language. And language's purpose seems to be the uncovering of the unknown. There's some people who they can fathom after their afterlife like as if they're going somewhere. I honestly have reached a point where I am wondering what else. And there's nothing. It's like when the self, when the attention realizes how the subject that it thinks it is that is moving the object is actually the presence of pure attention, instantaneously intelligent, then it's as if really it seems like trusting this world is the only way out of it. So it's as if you reach the unknown and you're like, what do I do with the unknown? And you either distrust it and you pilot down to the realms of animation, or you in some sense trust it, and so for the first time the inner workings of a human being become actually the confidence of an unknown being. So I'm pretty much saying I feel like the depth of this stuff is or like the edge of metaphysics is actually an unknown being. And what is more unknown than someone who was never here? It's like a religious person would have the challenge of, or a theologian, to be like, wait a minute, is it the inconceivable God that is looking out through my eyes, or is it little old me? Or is it little sinful me? Like, what is it? To me, I feel the moment a person can acknowledge something of its true value, then that intelligence becomes an ally. Right? So it's as if you acknowledge the nature of your memories, and so your memories, the past becomes your ally. You acknowledge the nature and the freedom that is found in the present, the grace of the present world, and then in some sense when you acknowledge its nature and you see the emptiness of it, that means it's like a single moment is empty, but more than a single moment, suddenly fullness can be applied. And what's fascinating is every creature has a relationship. Every conscious entity has a relationship with the unknown variables of their world. Like, we may not have a lot in common when it comes to our knowledge, but as if we were 8 billion explorers on a rock in the middle of nowhere, it's like the unknown is our commonality, right? Imagine like there was this, for example, the sort of like back in the day when there was military or war, let's say when there was war, the military would go to villages and try to find soldiers, right? For me, I am saying, what if the human ethos renounced physical destruction and for a moment wondered about, okay, we are all actually in conflict with an unknown outcome. I shouldn't say in conflict, but what I'm trying to say is like I don't know, if sometimes I think I have what it takes, and sometimes I think I don't. But this attitude where I think how they say the enemy of my enemy is my friend. I'm not saying the unknown is an enemy, but it's the greatest challenge. It's the greatest challenger of the human mind, right? That means if somebody says, Mr. Within, who was your teacher? I'll say the unknown moments of my life. They were the greatest teachers, and their greatest teachings was that there was more than I ever. Pretty much, if the future is a challenge for every human being, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. It's another way of saying, imagine a civilization that's realized, okay, the greatest conquest of mankind is not to just, build statues of knowledge, but in some sense it's the unknown, right? Uncharted territory. Like, this is why explorers simultaneously can become the greatest poets, right? It's as if we all capable advanced communicators in the realm enlist in some sense a retaliation. It's as if we're the human kingdom, and the walls of our kingdom is the consciousness of our civilization, the conscious edges of our borders of our civilization. It's like the human kingdom. And so the human kingdom is under siege by not just a physical army, but we're under siege by the circumstances of our world. And it's another way of saying, how did a species retaliate to the void, to the nature of experience being unknown? That means technically we're unknown experiencers of a noble world. I think there's these quotes I could read that kind of like bring in, explain this unknownness, from more of a mystical angle than I'm doing in this episode. Okay. There's this quote from Papaji where he says, "Your nature is silence and it is not attainable. It always is." Ramana Maharshi, he says, "God is not an object to be seen. He is the subject. He cannot be seen. He's the seer. Find the seer." I don't know if people know this, but Papaji was Ramana Maharshi's disciple. Shri Nisargadatta Maharaj, he says, from the standpoint of the absolute truth, Satya, all conceptual knowledge is ignorance, mithya. Shri Nisargadatta Maharaj says, "Do not worry. It is a waste of intellect and energy. Spontaneously everything is happening in God, through God, and by God." And I guess as someone reading this quote, I should probably say, "My God." My God, these words are from another one. Shri Ramana Maharshi says, "Do not engage the mind much in the affairs of the world." Papaji says, "By the true knowledge of the self, the Kundalini arises by itself. It's not that you will first feel the rise of the Kundalini to the Sahasrara, and then you're enlightened. It's not true, and it will not happen. If you realize yourself by simply keeping quiet, you will see that the nature will listen to you. You will see that the nature will listen to you. Try this, and if it fails, I'll teach you Kundalini." Okay? Papaji says, "Keep quiet. Don't touch the thoughts. Let them be." Papaji says, again and again, we speak of this thing. Only get rid of your impediments and simply stay quiet. That's all. With the very burning desire, like somebody who is burning and will run to a well, or a river or a stream only for water. Someone who is burning must go to the water. He will not go anywhere else. Like this, if you have the burning desire, in quotations, I want to be free in this life before the end of this life. This must be a longing always in your mind. Then you will be successful. You will have won the game and you will be very happy always, because freedom and happiness and bliss go together. Yeah, I mean, I think probably the idea is like, what are the options? You either open your eyes and you're like, man, I'm not free. Or you open your eyes and you're like, oh my God, it's all been free. There's a freedom here. Now, sheerness, and by the way, guys, these are mystical quotes from Vedanta, right? My own ideology is like, I'm trying to build an advanced civilization, but I want like a billion enlightened beings to build it. I want beings that can have an ability to acknowledge the multidimensional to build the advanced civilization. But anyways, Srila Sargadatta Maharaj says your outer life is unimportant. You can become a night watchman and live happily. It is what is inward that matters. Your inner peace and joy you have to earn. It is much more difficult than earning money. No university can teach you to be yourself. The only way to learn is by practice. Right away, begin to be yourself. Discard all you are not and go even deeper. You are not even a human being. You just are a point of awareness coextensive with time and space and beyond both, the ultimate cause itself uncaused. Wow. There's a quote from a man called, I don't know if I can pronounce his name, Siddhara Meshwar Maharaj. He says beingness translates to knowledge in quotations or consciousness in quotations. In quotation. Bondage is the state of mind when it is preoccupied with something else. When the mind is free of distractions, it is Brahman. The mind is clean and still when it is not thinking about objects in it. That is the Brahman state. Yeah, it's another way of saying being able to acknowledge the independence of our physical existence. Being able to acknowledge the independence of, let's say, our psychological existence. And then being able to acknowledge the interdependence of how, from an unknown instantaneous moment of being, we are viewing both of this. It's another way of saying freedom is there before the idea of us is there, which thinks it doesn't have it. Because freedom from the mystical standpoint is a quality of the realm. It is not something that a person just attains. It's like when you stop being the self that is suffering, you get to experience the self that never could. There's a story, which I don't know who said this story to me, but I remember someone saying it to me. The story was from King Solomon, from, let's say, the religious traditions, or Abrahamic traditions. And there's this story that this farmer goes to this king, and King Solomon was technically seen as a prophet and a king simultaneously. For example, through the Abrahamic tradition. And the idea is that there's this story. I don't know if it's true or not, but it's just the story I heard. It has more to it, so I'm going to share. So in this story, King Solomon is this king that can speak to God, that can communicate to, that has access to divinity. And somebody comes to this king, this poor farmer, and says, "King, I have nothing, help me out." the king gives him a jewel, gives him a rare jewel, right? And the farmer goes, and the farmer gives the jewel to his old, it's a very old farmer, and the old farmer goes home and gives the jewel to his very old wife, and says, "Honey, hide this somewhere," you know. And so what happens is, the old wife puts the jewel in, what do you call it, a container, a vase of rice, right? Just to hide it. But she ends up, days pass by, weeks pass by, and she forgets that it was there, and she gives the vase to the neighbor to hold, you know. And so one day the husband comes, right, and says, "Where's the jewel?" You know. And so the wife says, "I don't know," you know. And it's the scenario where he's lost his jewel, and he goes back to the king. He goes back to the king and says, "King, I lost the jewel, you know, help me out again." And the king's like, "All right, here's another jewel." You know, the king's like, "I'm the king, I'll help this, you know, I'll help my kingdom." And so the farmer takes the jewel. Now this way, the old farmer is taking a road where he has to cross the stream or this water or something, and he's passing by, like, let's say this, you know, sort of stream where there's, you know, still big fish in it, right? And so right when he's passing this, let's say, sort of stream, he suddenly drops the jewel, and a fish jumps out of the water and eats the, what do you call it, swallows the jewel and goes away. And the farmer goes home and says, "You won't believe what happened. I lost the jewel." And both, it's like the old couple is in this sorrow, and the farmer's like, "I can't go back to the king anymore," right? But the wife's like, "You know, the rent is due, you have to," you know. And so, I don't know, something like that. And so what happens is, you know, after like months, the farmer's like, "All right, I have no choice." And the farmer goes to King Solomon and tells him the scenario, right? And King Solomon goes and has an audience with like the divinity or the logos or God, right? And the king says, "Why is it that when I try to give this farmer jewels and treasure, this farmer can't hold on to it? Why is that the case?" And the moral of the story is a lesson to King Solomon, where the voice of God, the voice of the divine, tells King Solomon that you think you choose who gets what. You know, it's like, have you forgotten who is, you know, up there poetically? And so it's this idea where, you know, King Solomon suddenly realizes there's nothing to technically worry about when it comes to the destiny of that farmer, right? And let's say through the inner instruction comes, the King Solomon gives this jewel to the farmer, and the farmer is like, "Oh my God, it's like you're next level king. Like, how many times can you be compassionate? You know, this is, you know." And so the farmer takes the king takes the jewel. And the king is in some sense just smiling, because he has realized there's an unknown field at work here. Okay. And so the story goes that the farmer gets the ring, and he goes home and he says, "Honey, I found the ring and all this." Sorry, not the ring, the jewel. "I found this jewel." Sorry, not found, but it's like the king gave me this jewel, and he puts the jewel on the table, right? And he says, "It's such a good day, such a blessed day." And he says, the old farmer says to his wife, it's like, "All right, what are we having for dinner?" And the wife says, "We're gonna have fish." Like, it's like a fish she cooked, right? And so the farmer opens up, like right when he's about to cut the fish, he feels something solid in there, and to his surprise, he sees that the jewel that he lost is in that fish. It's like, what a small world, right? And they both celebrate, shocked, and midway while they're celebrating, their energy levels are going up. Suddenly, you know, the old wife remembers, "Oh my God, the first jewel is in that jar of rice, like in the neighbor's house." And she goes and grabs the jar of rice, and suddenly there's 3 jewels there, right? And let's say the idea is pretty much from this, like, let's say, ancient story, The idea is that the faith in, it's like the trust in the world's intelligence, not just your own intelligence. It's as if things are happening with a perfection that man's mind can't really fathom, right? You know, imagine like chess pieces on a chessboard suddenly became conscious, like, oh my God, where am I? Am I in war? You know? And so the chess pieces may not understand how the chess master is moving these chess pieces, right? But if they have faith in their position, something incredible ends up happening, right? And so this is the greater awareness, I would say, of the advanced humanity, that we're like, okay, we trust the known, but now we also trust the unknown. And life becomes a performance of the greatness of a species. It's like, I can't fathom any type of culture, more global culture, more beautiful than pretty much an advanced civilization having at least, let's say, if somebody's like an ego needs to run the system, the ego in the advanced civilization would be that every part of the kingdom of humanity deserves to be advanced, right? And my view is that the future generations always wear the crown, and what that means is that we are serving the kingdoms of the future humanity. Technically, the crown can go on no person's head, it's always on the future. So, you know, it's another way of saying we are all living and serving honorably the royalty of the future of humanity in this world. Imagine having an advanced honor. It's as if the mind doesn't have time to suffer when advancement's waiting. You see, there's like something more here than, you know, how the past convinces us. A visible entity needs to acknowledge, in some sense, where the visibility is at. And it's another way of saying a shaped entity, the moment it acknowledges a shapeless intelligence, it cannot just be a shaped entity. This is what I think Nirvikalpa Samadhi implies. To be free, not from the beliefs outside of your eyes, but also the beliefs inside your eyes. To realize how unknown this whole thing has been, claiming it through language. It's like ideological truth sometimes appears to be a sort of poetry of madness. It's like the playful journey of a species to discover how advanced it is. I feel that should be the global ethos of the future generations. Anyways, guys, thanks for listening. I hope this episode was helpful. Whoever you are, feel free to comment in the video. Comment on the video, and if if you have noticed yourself more than an object, or if you've realized how you're noticing yourself more than an object, it's just an object. On some level, we're either the hallucination of the periodic table, or we are what moves it. Thanks for listening. Blessings.